If we first look at the B2C and B2B segments, we could kind of split them into two operators. There's what we call corporate recommerce, where it's a brand or retailer who owns the items already and are kind of selling them out as used or refurbished or renting them out. And the other side of that might be what we call aggregator brands. They're independent companies that have purchased items from the market. So they might have offered trading or cashback offerings or buyback offerings for the consumers, or they might have bought them from other aggregators. An example of this might be, for example, Swappy, who aggregates used iPhones from the market and then sells them forward. That's the kind of, if we now first focus on the B2C and B2B, those are the two things that I would kind of look there. Companies selling to other companies and companies selling to consumers.
So the main difference between these models is actually where they get their supply from.
Yeah, I think in Recommerce in general, if you want to understand a player in the market, it's best to look at their supply source. Supply is always the hard thing in Recommerce, and also it's the most telling of the, let's say, market potential and the potential bottlenecks and all of that of a player. So corporate Recommerce tends to get their supply from their own product returns. They might actually manufacture some of the items themselves, so brands might actually be using their own manufactured inventory. And then whereas a aggregator kind of taps into a market to buy stuff out of it, so used phones or used clothes, and that's why they're called aggregators.
So are the corporate Recommerce companies mainly doing Recommerce on the side if they're relying on the product returns, or are they also ordering or manufacturing some items that are designed to withstand the Recommerce and the multiple cycles?
Yeah, I think it's a question what defines on the side. So if we look at ski industry, we have brands like Atomic and Fisher who specifically manufacture product types, for example, skis that are designed for rentals. It is a relevant segment for them, so it's maybe more than a side hustle. So they have specific design and manufacturing processes, and they take into account the life cycle of a rental good by having unique IDs and all of these things into it. But of course, there are then players that have maybe entered Recommerce by having a history of not necessarily manufacturing with the purpose of selling items more than once, but are now adjusting to it slowly. So maybe optimizing their product designs a bit for Recommerce. IKEA might be a good example that has invested quite a lot in the ability to turn product returns to a second sale, or to even facilitate a peer-to-peer transaction of IKEA goods as a marketplace. So yeah, but corporate Recommerce on a big picture, you could say that for them it's probably still like a side revenue stream compared to the linear models that they have.
And then the aggregator brand sounds like that's their main business and that's what they are actually focusing fully on, is the Recommerce.
Yeah, they've kind of entered the market with the idea that, hey, well, there is this untapped potential in the market. For example, in the US, there's $600 billion worth of unused goods that have value sitting in the households of Americans. So these aggregator brands are kind of acknowledging that there's $600 billion worth of goods that we could buy back from the consumers and sell with a profit. So it's kind of reusable value that is sitting idle with the potential of revenue. So they kind of tap into that market as their supply.
How large is the B2B and B2C market, and how is size split between corporate Recommerce and aggregator brands?
It's kind of the one thing is to say, once we start to go to the market numbers, is that Recommerce is historically extremely hard to quantify because it's not that well recorded. Like the consensus, like there's no statistics that have been recorded for 50 years for Recommerce and repair, but there's some estimates there. So if for Recommerce, it's estimated to be something between 20 to 40 billion in US and Europe together. And then the aggregator brands, that's maybe 20 to 35 billion. Kind of they're, you could say, even sized. If you compare that to the overall sales of all of the commerce, we're talking about single percentages.
Sound like they are actually quite large markets already and probably some markets that are actually growing year by year.
Yeah, there's various estimates on the growth rates, but usually it's double digits in a year. So we're talking about anything from like 10 to 20% year-on-year growth rates on this market. So it is a significantly growing market because there's tailwinds like regulation, consumer preferences, and maybe even purchasing power being a bit lower. So consumers stepping into lower price point goods and all of that. So there is significant tailwinds for this market.
How are these items then sold to the consumers? So what is the main channel?
Yeah, so when we talk about B2C and B2B operations, the one thing that kind of defines that is that these corporate retailers or aggregators are kind of retail brands. They're usually selling those under their own channels, so white label channels. It might be their online store that they built with Twice or Shopify or Wix, or it might be their own retail space. So it's usually, well, of course, everyone can tap into kind of marketplaces and so on, but by principle, they kind of sell it under their own channels that they already have, which usually has a few things that, or kind of, it affects a few things. So if you sell under your own channel and you are a trusted brand, you might need a less kind of trust facilitation between the consumer and you. So if you're returning your phone to Best Buy to get a cashback or similar, you likely kind of trust that Best Buy is not going to screw you on the deal. Like you might even be willing to do that via shipping. Now that's not necessarily true if you don't have a trusted brand or if you're doing peer-to-peer sales. So in peer-to-peer sales, you might need some facilitation of trust and shipping and payments in between. Whereas with a corporate Recommerce, the corporates can tap into the brand and trust that they build over time. And then the same applies to the aggregator brands. That's why something like Swappy, at the end of the day, for someone looking to buy a good as new iPhone, they are a retailer or kind of a source of iPhones among others. So the quality is the same, or at least should be, and the price points might be a bit lower. But from a buyer's perspective, Swappy, for example, in the Nordics have already grown to be a trusted brand. So that adds a few benefits for the business that they can tap into.
Sounds like the brands that are already have been in business and when they're expanding into Recommerce, they are in a good position because they already have that brand trust. But then these new companies like Swappy, they probably have to do quite a lot of work to actually earn the trust.
Yeah, it is like launching it, going from 0 to 1 in anything. It's like you have to invest in the brand, you have to start kind of accumulating reviews and all of the things that apply to any business. Like if you launch a corner store, you probably have some launch campaigns where you kind of invite the neighborhood, visit the store and so on. So all of that still applies. I think in Recommerce, you might often see that before you've had the chance to build an audience for yourself, you might start to do your sales over, eBay or Craigslist and kind of that way launch to a marketplace. The cost of that is, of course, that you give X amount of the sales to the marketplace. So it can be anything from like 10 to 20, 30% that a marketplace takes as the cost of facilitating the sale and trust and facilitating shipping and facilitating payments. So it might be that at the end of the day, these kind of launching sales leave really thin margins for you, or in some cases, zero margin, but it helps you launch your brand. You get yourself out, and then you can over time start directing the traffic directly to you as a brand for the second purchases, third purchases, and so on.